The second seminar gives you some insights in the background of the tools that you are using. And the most important one, the backbone of this methodology, is based on design thinking. And just a very brief, short history on design thinking. It is IDEO that started with human-centered design down in 78 of the previous century. It took until 2009, and I want to give credit to Roger Martin, who was in those days at the Rotman Business School, when he published his book, Design of Business. Since before, design was very much industrial design. Thanks to, amongst others, Roger Martin, we brought design thinking into the realm of design of businesses. Now, 15 years ago, that design thinking became very popular. And when we, in 2008, had the first conference on the principles of responsible management education, somebody said the business school of the future will be a design school. The concept wicked problems goes much further back in history. John Dewey in 1935 already mentioned the existence and how to deal with wicked problems. In more modern days, it's Buchanan in 1992 who published the first time the concept of wicked problems. And finally, you have numbers of these schools around the world. The most famous ones is the series sponsored by Hazel-Plattner, the first one being in Stanford, the second one in Potsdam at the Hazel-Plattner Institute, and the third one in Cape Town at the University of Cape Town. What are the basic principles of design thinking? There are 6 basic principles of design thinking. First, show, don't tell. So make prototypes, show it to people, have them use it, learn from it, improve it, and show it again. Secondly, try to have a coherent vision, craft clarity, right? Try to get over the messiness of the problem. Spend time to understand profoundly the problem before you jump to solutions. Thirdly, focus on human values. It started all with human interface, but it is all about what can you do for your client. So you start with an empathy map, which is how close can you get to your client? How can you really feel what your client would like you to do? So continue focusing on those human values. Be mindful of the process you work through in these 6 sessions, since there is a very good logic behind that process. It doesn't fall out of heaven. Embrace experimentation, right? Don't try to make from the first time the ultimate possible best solution, but try to do something viable, test it, and improve it. Hence, have a bias towards action instead of too much of analysis, and choose, and that is equally important, for radical collaboration. If you go into successful design teams, they are radically different from each other. They are very diverse teams. Now, the principles of the approach we walk you through are based on integration of design thinking and systems thinking, and we invite you in a way to create your own learning log. That's what you do in your personal transformation journey. You create your own personal learning log, and we invite you to talk about that with your peers and to ask for peer feedback. Your peers are the ones that best understand you, since they share with you the exact same situation. So the design cycle is the one you see here. You start by making an empathy map. You start by empathizing with your client. Then you go to a kind of a definition, a kind of a framing. You're going to ideate your framing to see whether you can be more creative, more innovative, more impactful, more useful. And then you're going to build a prototype, which you're going to test. The results of those tests are going to lead to a new empathy map, which allows you to reframe, to re-ideate, and you're gone in a few design thinking loops. About systems thinking, there are a few systems thinking tools. We're not going to use them all, but I do want to mention them, 3 which I think are reasonably popular and useful. One is soft systems methodology, on which in your resources you will find a reasonably detailed description on how to use it. It's an easy way that helps you structuring the unstructurable. Causal loop diagrams is something we are going to touch on, which basically tries to build from your item tree that you have, you're going to connect different items and identify the different loops in your entire context. If you do that detailed enough, that can lead to very valuable systems dynamics simulations. And lastly, you have, for instance, agent-based simulations, which is an approach, a methodology that is slightly more complicated, but that also gives you simulations of how interaction of different agents, entities, people, organizations move together, and out of which emerges possible wicked solutions. With systems thinkings and wicked problems, you concentrate on understanding the problem area as wide and as broad as possible. That is why your first assignment was to make that item tree as wide and as broad as possible. And then your solutions are possible outcome scenarios once and only once you have understood the problem. So you will only get to scenarios in the 4th seminar, which you're going to ideate and then prototype. But before that, we spent a lot of time on really understanding the problem at hand. And that is illustrated by this poem of Rabindranath Tagore. A very great musician came and stayed in our house. He made one big mistake. He was determined to teach me music, and consequently no learning took place. Nevertheless, I did casually pick up from him a certain amount of stolen knowledge. This shows you the whole of what complexity theory is, and it highlights a few of the areas which we touch on in the approach that we share here with you. There's no need to go in detail on this study, but just to give due credit to those people that have invented all those concepts and theories, I think it is good to mention it. We are now in the first phase of the design cycle, which is a phase of observation and empathizing. Observation in the sense to try and get as close as possible to your client, really feel empathy to your client. And ideally you do that in a number of steps that end up in making your empathy map. Now, if you really want to inform your empathy map correctly, you could, for instance, observe your client, make pictures of your client and bring it together in a slideshow so that you can visualize the people for whom you're doing it. Needless to say, a second road to go is, of course, to interview your client and to have a few interviews with a few different clients. All that leads into making an empathy map. And we already discussed making an empathy map in your personal transformation journey. An empathy map is nothing more than trying to get as close as possible to your client by identifying what that user, that client, thinks, feels, does, and says. And there is an example here of an empathy map of a person, Jamie in this case, that is going to buy a TV. So what does Jamie think? She thinks, why is this so hard? What else am I missing? I want something awesome. Right? That is what she's thinking. What is she feeling? She feels overwhelmed. She feels excited. She feels anxious. She might buy the wrong thing. What does she do? She checks. She checks websites. She compares products. She makes lists of pros and cons. What does she say? She says, what size is the best? Where should I start? Now, clearly, if you know all that of your client, you're able to get very close and really empathize, feel with that client. And that's what the purpose is of an empathy map. You start up front, before thinking about solutions, and understanding the people for whom you do that. And that is the assignment of this second session. The gold one, you'll work on your personal transformation journey, and you work on your empathy-based stories. You find more detail in the webinar around your personal transformation journey, and you find the material that you have to complete in the roadbook. Back to your project. The purpose now is to make an empathy map of a focus group, a particular focus group. Now, you can't take everybody, so concentrate on that group of people that you think are the ones that would be best served by your solutions, or the ones for whom you make the solution, if there is somebody who ordered the solution. And then, next step, once you've made your empathy map, then you're going to try and integrate the results of that empathy map in your item 3. Now, be creative, be bold. And what you're going to see is some items that were in the map might disappear, but most probably you're going to add some items. The more time you spend on this stage, on really empathizing correctly and deeply with your client, this is what is going to pay off once you get to defining your scenarios.